I guess the Australian internet cables are waking up too.
It's communicating by semaphore.
It's just a dude. It's just a dude with a flashlight.
There's just a line of Australian like coastal warships that lines out between the west coast of the US and the east coast of Australia. They have to communicate by flags.
You can probably hear some
Yeah.
some kids show in the background. That's pacifying the toddler right now.
Yeah, that's all good.
We're talking with the Scottish Koala, and he runs the Scottish Koala YouTube channel. You are a YouTuber who covers a lot of War Thunder content, but also other sort of military sim, military game type games. What am I leaving out?
I've started branching out into a lot of, I guess, IRL military history type videos as well, which seems to have done well for me recently.
Oh yeah, I remember that now. I like those. I think that games like War Thunder are a great stepping point into things like real history, and it doesn't hurt that the game is set up in a way that sort of...
Yeah, it is kind of a good segue, and the audience crosses over quite nicely, especially with a lot of the more modern military vehicles that are being added to War Thunder. There's a lot more room for content discussing, the exact statistics and the history of the vehicle as it was used, and especially when it still remains so relevant today with vehicles like the Warrior that have been added to War Thunder that are still in use today. So there's plenty of room to branch out into that type of content.
Yeah, living current history. And speaking of which, you were born and then things happened. So go ahead and tell me about some of your early memories from when you were a small koala, as it were.
When I was first little Joey, growing up not really growing up in the UK, but born in Scotland, very early in my childhood, my family moved out to Australia, or my mum moved out to Australia, and that's where the koala part comes from. So I have been living in Australia for about 15 or so years now.
And how old are you now, if you don't mind me asking?
I am 21.
21. You're still a child. Just kidding.
Not according to you Americans, not anymore.
Yeah, I feel like an old man every time I play War Thunder until I meet some guy that's like 56. Or, there's even older folks in War Thunder specifically. It's one of the things I enjoy. But that's not here nor there. We're here to talk about you. So, you grew up from a little Joey in the mystical land of Australia. Are there some places you remember going, some things you remember doing in Australia that stand out to you now?
See, very early on in my childhood in Australia, we went on a big trip all the way around Australia. My dad had a surfing competition up on the east coast, and we kind of used that as a springboard to travel all around the entire country, which was a phenomenal experience. And I've got to say, I think Australia may have the biggest diversity in environments of any country I know. We've got the arid desert in the middle, where there's nothing but sand and the occasional blade of grass, which is probably used as an internet router. We've got forests down in the south. We've got coastlines with massive sheer cliffs, and of course the 12 Apostles are one of the wonders of the world, which is basically just a bunch of rocks that jut straight out of the ocean and rise up to about 300 feet. And then we've got snowy mountains off a little bit further round. We've got everything you could think of.
I would love to go see the sights in Australia.
Yeah, Australia's far away. You want to fly anywhere else in the Western world, and you're going to need to take about 2 days transport.
It might be a little bit of a distraction, but you're mentioning that Australia's far away. Does that mean that you have more access to Eastern culture?
Yeah, a lot of... we have quite a strong relationship with Japan in Australia, particularly down in South Australia and in Victoria, the kind of state one step over. There's a lot of Japanese and kind of across Asian culture, particularly Japan, but there's also, of course, a lot of people from Thailand, especially one of my oldest friends in Australia is from Thailand. His family's from Thailand. You've got a fair few people from places like Singapore. It's kind of particularly in the education and university. You've got a lot of international students from places like Japan, Singapore, Vietnam, as well as places like Brazil. Popular destination for, I guess, Brazilian older students is studying in Australia. So, yeah, there's quite a large multicultural population here.
That's kind of a neat thing to have, Australia being a relatively small country when compared with places like the United States. And yet, just because of your position, you have this interesting mix of ethnicities and cultures that move through the area.
A very wide mix of all kinds of different people. A lot of people from Britain still see Australia as the destination to go to, which I find mad, because if you're used to British temperatures, you'll come to Australia and get roasted within a month.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of... We pretty much have everyone but Americans here, to be perfectly honest.
We talked a little bit about you growing up, and I'm kind of curious, what did you want to be?
First thing I can remember wanting to be would be a pilot. Always wanted to be a pilot. I was never quite sure whether I wanted to be a commercial pilot or a military pilot or anything like that. And, I mean, I was kind of too young to even think about that at that stage. It was just a kind of, planes are cool. That was about the extent of my wishing to become a pilot one day. But of course, that never ended up happening. Actually, a few years ago, I did sign up for the Royal Australian Air Force and was unfortunately not able to get in due to some issues with my back. But if that hadn't been the case, there's every opportunity that I might be an F-18 pilot today. Instead, I'd make YouTube content, so the more you know.
You wanted to be a pilot. Let's talk a little bit about school and learning growing up. Your dad was a surfer. What did your mom do?
So my mum's always had kind of a less formal job. She always used to work door-to-door as an Avon saleswoman. Was doing that for years and years and years. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically you go door-to-door selling shampoo and soap.
That's interesting that you would mention that, because Australian cosmetics are actually really popular in the US right now.
Yeah? Wow, okay. That's something I did not know. But Avon has recently pulled out of Australia, so that left Mum without that job, and she's recently been, well, I say recently, been in the last few years running a play group for children. So you've got your little toddler in the background, and I'm kind of used to the noise on certain days of the week, if that makes sense.
The frolicking of tiny
Just
as
long as they don't breach my weekend, then we're all good. Yeah, I have my spots that I need to keep safe. These are my areas. No one's allowed.
Yeah, I have basically a shark cage in the living room, and I get everything inside, and my baby gets everything outside, and also everything inside. So your mom is, what I would say, more of a dedicated housewife, and being a dedicated house husband myself, that's a great calling to be called too. I'm not sure how much similarity there is between the school system in America and the one that you went through in Australia, but maybe you could share with us a little bit about going to school and going through the grades growing up.
Well, I honestly had not the best early school experience. I was kind of bullied significantly. One of the things I can always remember, though, is the problem in Australia is, especially down where I live, which is relatively rural, and every school has people coming from, half an hour's drive away to get to school. So there's very little opportunity for friends that live, I guess, within walking distance for a young child. So it was relatively isolated, say, after school and on weekends. It was not, I only had one or two, I guess, close school friends that lived within any sort of walking distance. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's one thing that I think Australia, and of course some areas in America and would have that as well, but that's one of the things that stood out for me is you can't just walk next door and there'd be neighbours next door that went to your school. It's very rare that things are that convenient.
You're definitely not alone when it comes to being bullied, especially Well, I got some good bullying in the lower grades when I was in Alaska. But when we moved to Oregon, it was a whole lot different culture. And would you say that there was sort of an acceptance of bullying in your day, or was it just some standout individuals who were looking to pick a fight with the scrawny kid or whatever?
Yeah, it was really a case of that. Just, I mean, I was a bit of a know-it-all as a kid, I'll admit. And
Oh, you already had that attitude.
as my as some of my content will no doubt demonstrate.
I have noticed that.
I mean, as a kid, that's cause enough to be picked on for most of your life. So that kind of paved the way for me to, I guess. What I can say is that the isolation I mentioned before wasn't such a bad thing in that regard, because I very much got used to my own company rather than dealing with the cool kids at school. That was not going to work out for me.
Oh, 12-year-old Toshio can definitely identify with that. Keep telling me things.
Me and sports and I don't mix, besides more individual sports, something like tennis, which I played for many, many years. But any team sports, any sports like soccer or football, Australian rules football, which is something I tried as a kid for about 3 months and then said, nope, this is not for me. This seems like a war zone, and I'm a scrawny little nerd, so let's not get involved in that.
Okay, so scrawny little nerd does not want to rely on teammates. It makes sense how you ended up in War Thunder. Carry on.
Yeah, I kind of now I get to bully people back with my 5 years of playing War Thunder and my crew slot skills and knowledge of the game. I can get my symbolic revenge on all the cool kid bullies who don't understand how to make ones and zeros turn into a fighter jet.
Yeah, and how dare they not grind out crew skills and tech trees for 3 years before trying to face you, right?
Yeah. And that was my segue into gaming as a whole, I think. I never used to play online games. Number one, because internet connection in Australia meant that online multiplayer was never going to work well. And where I live in Australia, I mean, internet is bad in Australia to begin with, but if you're on the East Coast, it's less bad. And I am on the very South Coast. If you know, the shape of Australia has one big chunk taken out of the bottom. I'm kind of partway along that chunk.
Mid-chunk, if you will.
Yeah, if you Google a map of Adelaide, Adelaide's the capital city of South Australia, I'm kind of just below the city of Adelaide, and this is one of the more, I guess, backwater places in Australia. So anything online never really worked out. And of course, internet's gotten better over the years, but as growing up as a kid, nothing online would ever work. So I would play single-player games. I would play games that I could get my own entertainment out of. One of the first games I played heavily would be Age of Empires 2.
Oh, yeah.
The original RTS, I guess. Probably not, but, you know, one of the most iconic real-time strategy games I think I would say that has ever existed.
Oh, yeah.
And that was my entry into gaming at all.
That is, again, strikingly similar to my gaming history. I can think of Command & Conquer, the original game, being my first real PC game that I got into.
I never got into that, but I think as far as my interest as a kid kind of branched out from Age of Empires, because I love that kind of medieval scene, and I used to read a lot of books, a lot of novels that were kind of set in that time frame as well, and then ended up being very obsessed with, I guess, time frame throughout history. And it's only since playing War Thunder that I've really given a toss about modern history, which is quite interesting. It's only in the past few years that I've really cared much about researching of my own volition, if that makes sense.
Oh, it totally does. And I think that having a game as a launch pad is a great chance to just make you realize that those things can be interesting. Another one, of course, being the listening to the personal stories of people that lived through history. And YouTube has been an amazing outlet for those stories to get out, and that now includes your own. So,
most definitely.
So yeah, moving on from the first games that you played, and we learned a little bit about school and how you may have gotten yourself in some trouble with your attitudes, which is
with
something I completely...
With the cool kids at school.
Like, when you're the small kid, and I was a small kid, like, I was so weak in freshman year of high school that I couldn't bench press the bar, which is 45 pounds. That's not a lot of weight. That's a big sack of potatoes. I couldn't even lift it off my chest. I don't know how I was that weak. But I was. And when you're the scrawny kid, you've got to stand up for yourself, and you've got to stand out some way.
You've got to. I think it kind of cultivates an attitude of trying to find an alternate way of proving yourself, if that makes sense. And I think that kind of that made me a bit of a know-it-all, because I thought, you know what, I'm never gonna be one of the physically adept kids at school, so why don't we sharpen that mind a bit?
That makes a lot of sense. So,
and I'm still working on that.
Well, you know what? You're still young. You really ought to. And definitely, if you go through life with this idea of, I don't really know anything yet, even as an old man, that attitude will serve you well, because you learn so fast if you're open to it.
Oh, of course. And, I've made plenty of mistakes with my knowledge in YouTube content, and every time I do, I think I've given myself a very good way of being presented with more knowledge, having a community that is always willing to, I think a lot of the War Thunder, especially the War Thunder community that's focused on the real life history behind this stuff, is also some scrawny nerds. So it kind of, I've had the privilege of being able to muck stuff up in content and be corrected by a ton of extremely knowledgeable people who can fill me in, and then I'm constantly learning through my YouTube, career.
That's something I've actually watched you do, as I've watched your channel develop from that guy who was announcing that he was going to do dogfights with subscribers. So I went ahead and subscribed and then messaged you. I'd never done a dogfight. You were my first dogfight, Koala. And I could probably count. Carry on. What were you saying?
I was never really sure exactly how I wanted my content to turn out. So that was one thing I tried. I mean, I think as far as the War Thunder content goes, I've tried pretty much everything.
It's almost like there's a formula for War Thunder now, and it really revolves around covering basically whatever's coming. That's what everybody's looking for. And then when there's not this massive flood of new content coming to the game, you can kind of do whatever you want, because nobody's watching.
Yeah, and I do notice that, and I think every other month I'm waiting for Gaijin to announce new things. And then every even numbered month we get new content. Every odd numbered month, and I'm sitting here waiting for Gaijin to announce something new so that I can make some more content that will bring new people in. And in the meantime, it's a case of trying to work out what to do next.
Yeah, that sounds like life, doesn't it? Speaking of, one of the things I've been meaning to ask you about is I remember getting you in some trouble a while back in a live stream when I got you confused with another live streamer and asked you about your girlfriend. And you two have been together. I asked the wrong question because I thought you were somebody else, and she was concerned. But
oh yes, no, I remember that.
Yeah, you remember that. And you two have been together for a significant amount of time. How did the two of you meet? Yep. And then what details? Give us the deets.
Well, we met through a drama production at school in my final year of high school. We were doing a Shakespearean drama production, so very over the top, very dramatic. That was perfect for me, being that scrawny nerd who was obsessed with, dramatic arts.
Which piece of Shakespeare were you working on?
Romeo and Juliet.
Oh my gosh!
I was not Romeo and she was not Juliet, so it didn't quite happen that perfectly.
Ooh, did you get to be Benvolio?
Yes, actually.
I knew it! That's who I would have cast you as.
You got it.
You're a perfect Benvolio.
And basically, our drama group all was very close-knit in school. The high school that I went to very much focused on dramatic arts, and a lot of the same people that I did drama with also did music. We also did history. That's one of the things that my school kind of partly focused on. Very little physical side to my school. Very little, sports or physical health. That wasn't really one of the focuses of my high school. So the same group kind of went throughout drama and other performing arts and dramatic arts that were there. So we became very close-knit, and we had a couple of parties. One when our play first launched, and we were performing for a week. And the first time we had one, we had a big party at one of the houses of someone who was in the group. And then a little bit later, when we graduated, we had another big party just for all the drama students. And of course, my partner Monica was there for both of them. And we ended up becoming quite good friends because we ended up having a lot of the same interests besides gaming. That was one of the things we don't share. But pretty much everything else was, we both liked to read. We both liked our own company, if that makes sense. And we kind of evolved from there, really. It was one of the first times I'd been in a relationship with someone I wasn't good friends with beforehand, which I think as an adult that seems kind of arbitrary, but as a kid that was quite significant, or as a high school student that was quite a big thing.
It's a lot more of a risk.
And so we kind of got to know each other just as we left school. So we didn't have that, every day we'd see each other in school and every day we'd have classes and whatever. We didn't have that to kind of spring off of. We kind of did things very freely our own way. And I think that very much fits with both of our personalities. Of course, me being a YouTuber, it's not exactly the most straight line career. It's not exactly the most by the books, I guess, job. I can say that now, which I'm very proud of. But she's an artist. So she's also gone with a very free and not exactly by the books career choice.
Oh, well, you sort of are both scrawny already, so, starving artist, yeah, I can see it.
Yeah. So yeah, it was kind of, we very much made a habit out of doing whatever rather than sticking to any sort of plan. And we both enjoyed that, so we kind of grew together over that. And over the fact that basically any time we tried to explain our dream career to anyone above the age of, I guess, 18, they would always say, so what are you going to do for a real job? And we both had that problem. We both had that. I mean, I always used to want to be a writer as well, because I used to love to read. And I thought, you know what, I'd give my hand at writing a novel. Never ended up finishing one. And then lo and behold, I put my creativity into YouTube content instead. But there was always a case of, it's not a real job, and everyone would say that. And she had the same thing with being an artist. And we kind of understood each other in that way.
Well, I'm very glad that you decided to take the risk of going after something that's not your typical 9 to 5. And I can definitely tell you that people need to make that decision, and it's great to let people know that you can make it. And something that you've sort of been hinting at over a couple of these points is that you don't have a regular steady job, and I'm sure there's some other things that bring stress and worry into your life. Do you have a special way of dealing with those things? And if so, If so, why don't you share that with us?
See, it was always a plan. Since beginning this YouTube channel, it was always a plan to grow it to the point where I could do it as a career, and I've kind of been, I guess, in the habit of living quite cheaply so that I can justify that as soon as possible, and that's kind of it can be stressful. It can be stressful to worry about money. Is one specific thing. And of course, everybody who starts out on YouTube will tell you this, but if you're starting YouTube to make money out of it, then don't do that. That's a very bad idea. And that never works out for anyone who's just focused on getting money out of it. That's never going to work. But I absolutely adore my YouTube, and I think whenever I'm stressed about, anything, money included, making another YouTube video is honestly a very good way of de-stressing and coming up with ideas, and I really enjoy a lot of my videos, especially focusing on historical content and things like that, are scripted. So I'm writing out a script, and I'm trying to work out exactly how I'm going to say what I'm going to say, doing some research around, and then creating the video, doing the editing, and hitting that upload button, and it's all very... It's a lot of fun, and I get a real buzz hitting that upload button and starting to watch the views coming in and watching people's comments as some of the first people see the video, and it starts growing a little bit. It's so much fun.
So would you say that when you feel stressed, you tend to pour yourself into your work, and that helps give you the confidence to press on?
Yeah, exactly like that. I mean, the funny thing is that, especially if I'm stressed about, I don't have the money for this, don't have the money for that, and then I make a YouTube video, and lo and behold, that is a legitimate income anyway, so I help myself either way. It's a de-stress, and it actually does help the issue that I'm worried about in the first place. When I'm stressed about anything else, it's more a case of taking my mind off of it as well. And it's a very good way of doing that, because I think I get very into a specific video, and I think I would make a terrible film director for that, because I would be one of those film directors that wouldn't listen to anyone else's ideas, just because that's kind of I get very focused on an idea that I have, and when it's a YouTube video and it's entirely down to me, that's kind of allowed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it explains why your content always has your own personal feel to it. Oh, right! Pastimes. So, obviously, you're a gamer. It's kind of a useless term these days, because that just means that, pretty much our whole generation is gamers. But you play games on the computer, you make videos, you enjoy your work, so it's almost like a pastime to you, you cheater. And but also, is there a pastime that you engage in? Do you play non-electronic games? Do you have something you like to go out to do on a relaxed day? Or how should I put it this way? Maybe, what would you like to do on vacation?
Something I used to do a lot and don't really find the time to do anymore, but I play a lot of... so I used to play the piano and would branch out into a couple of other instruments as well, the cello, a little bit of guitar at one point, but I didn't really take to that. And I used to be a composer. This was one of the things I studied in high school, was music composition, and I'd jump on the computer and mess around with different settings and jump on my keyboard and jump back to the computer and create something of a day or of a weekend. And I actually had a YouTube channel years and years ago where I used to upload music to it, and that never took off. I think at maximum I had about 40-something subscribers. So that didn't exactly work out the best for me, but I really enjoyed that. As a pastime, it would always be, I'd decide, what, today I came up with an idea for a little tune, a little bit of a riff or something like that, and I'd turn it into a piece of music. And that would be a good way of immersing myself in something other than games. Besides that, I guess of a day off these days, I like to go into the city. Where I live is very suburban, very flat. So going into a big city, and Adelaide's not exactly a big city, but, tall buildings, bustling streets, there's a open market in the city, and it's a very nice place to just I guess, sit, walk around, observe the sights that you don't really see in a quiet suburban area.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I used to, when I was going to college, it felt like the town I was going to, I should say community college, where I was going to college in seemed like a city to me because I grew up out in the sticks, and I used to just walk around Walmart just to see people. And that's also probably because I was kind of a lonely guy when I was going to college. But you have your partner, you say, and the two of you are a good pair, I can tell from what I've seen. And let's see, you've talked a little bit about the fact that you are a musician. It's been too long since I played an instrument. Maybe you and Johnny from Potential History could compose some things together. That would be really cool, actually. And
that would be fun to get back into it. I think I have so little time to do that at the moment, but I always mean to get back to it and then never quite find the time to.
sometime you gotta give yourself a week off and treat yourself to just getting back into music. There's something healing about that, and just there's a pure joy there. And I need to do the same thing. You've reminded me of it. Not that I can take a week off from being a dad, though.
Yeah.
So, yeah, actually, before you have kids, get some music done, because after that, the music will be made by your children, and you'll delight in that, I'm sure. Speaking of, you are committed to your girlfriend, wife. Are you two planning on having kids? And tell us. I guess that could be kind of a personal question. You just say
yeah,
whatever you want to say.
as much as I can say, you know, we're still quite young. We would like to. It's on the cards, not right now because she's at university. I'm working on growing YouTube. Couldn't really have that extra commitment right now, but what we've said, and I mentioned this in a video, the first video I did this year, I mentioned this, was we made a little pact, and basically we said, when this YouTube channel of mine hits 100,000 subscribers, then we can have a child. And that's kind of a point of, you know, we have, I guess, a little bit of a stable platform from which, you know, we could feel free to branch out a little bit and explore our own lives without having to constantly worry about, you know, not having enough hours in the day. And I think, you know, if this channel grows to that kind of point, I very much hope it will, and will continue working until it does. At that point, we're going to, that's the plan at the moment. And of course that could change 1,000 times in the future, but that's kind of the little pact that we've made with each other at the moment.
Well, I love that the both of you have agreed on it, and it's something you can look forward to together. You can probably tell that I'm kind of proud of my kids just from
of course.
What ends up coming
of course.
through.
I remember the first time I found your channel, and I think I found 3 War Thunder videos and about 18 videos of your little girl.
Yep, you're there from the old days. What was I? Oh, right. You've told me some about your mom and dad, and I get the impression that you have a high opinion of them. Are there some lessons that you've learned about being a parent from your parents? And is that going to influence the way you raise your own kids?
Well, I think if I could point out one thing that I've, I guess, learned from my parents, being parents, I have a little brother, he's 9 years old at the moment, he has autism, so he's a lot of work, and he, you know, my family I like to think that we deal with that really, really well, and he's not exactly, you know, difficult to deal with as far as the autism spectrum goes. There's people that are unfortunately a lot worse off through that, I guess, mental disorder. I'm not even sure if I could call it a disorder or a handicap or something like that, whatever word you want to use for it. You know, it can make certain parts of life difficult. And I guess watching and being immersed in the way that we've looked after my little brother and kind of dealt with that and dealt with the little nuances in life that come with someone who has that kind of quote unquote disorder, for want of a better word, has taught me a lot, I guess.
So, are you saying that you have learned how to live in a patient and understanding way with some of the things that you wouldn't really otherwise understand about kids?
Yeah, much more so. I mean, I was an only child for the first about 12 years of my life. So growing up as a kid, I always wanted a little brother. And then as soon as I had one, I was already, I mean, I'm still a young child at 12. I'm not even at the teenage years yet. That's still very young. But according to me, at the time, I was kind of growing away from childlike, I guess being a childlike child. But by the time my little brother was old enough to kind of play the sort of things I would have wanted to play with a little brother back when I was, 7 or 8 years old, I was already 15, 16. So I kind of became just as much a third parent as a sibling to my little brother. And that was quite weird. And I know plenty of other people who've got such a big age gap between siblings, but of course I was an only child for that length until that time. So yeah, it was quite a culture shock almost. And it was a massive change in life, and I think we've pondered our way through it relatively well.
That makes a lot of sense, especially with, I think a decent term is special needs. This would be kids that just don't fit the normal way of, or the average way of parenting and education. And I have some close family friends that have autistic kids, and they are some of the coolest kids in the world, but they don't do things the same way as, well, the other kids that they go to school with. And let's see, I had something. I'm getting a bit absent-minded. I've just been sitting back listening and enjoying what you're saying. So give me a few seconds to get my thoughts together, and if you want to jump in with something on your own, just feel free to do it.
One thing I have been wanting to talk about Scotland is we took a holiday back to Scotland. And of course, when I first lived in Scotland as a child, I was far too young to really appreciate this. But when we went back to Scotland, it was middle of summer. We stayed on the coast, and you could see the islands, Isle of Arran, off the coast, off the west coast of Scotland. From a place called Ayr, which is where I came from originally, and the sun set in Ayr in the middle of summer is about 11:30 p.m. So for the entire evening, we were sitting, in our little upstairs window, watching the sunset at 11:30. It was quite magical, and of course Scotland has some really beautiful landscapes. There's castles, there's lochs, there's so much to see in Scotland, and it's got to have been one of my favourite places I've ever been. And I've had some pretty amazing privilege to travel. I mean, I've travelled all around Australia, I've been all around England, I've been to Denmark and a couple of other places around Europe. Never been to America. Unfortunately, that's one place I haven't been, but New Zealand, which is not the same country as Australia, for anyone who's confused. I know a lot of Americans, Europeans don't honestly know that, but no, New Zealand is not part of Australia. That's another place I've been lucky enough to go. I've got family that live in New Zealand, and I've kind of got family all over the place. So we had a privilege to travel all around as many places as you can think of, as many different parts of the world as you could think of, and Scotland's always somewhere I've felt a natural tie to, I suppose, which is kind of where the name for this YouTube channel came from. Is I feel a very strong connection to that part of my life and my heritage as well. My family originally came from Scotland, and we don't actually have any family left in Scotland anymore. They've all moved out to England. I guess it was too cold and rainy for them, and there were too many people that in the cities that aren't exactly the nicest of types. But where we stayed in Scotland was an absolutely beautiful place, and there is so much to explore there. It's a really amazing country to come from, I guess. Kind of the part of Scotland that no one hears about. Everyone likes to think of, when you think Scotland, you think Gerard Butler and Glasgow and Edinburgh and all the places that you hear about as kind of a standard. And I think honestly Australia has the same type of thing, really. You hear about Crocodile Dundee and you don't really hear about your average Australian person. But yeah, the part of Scotland that I came from was absolutely beautiful, and going back there was such a amazing experience in my life. I suppose something I'll always remember.
That's touching. One of the things as an American that I miss out on is having a real connection with the homeland. We used to hear stories about our ancestors who came over from, what was it, Norway or something? But those sort of things, they just don't really hit home. I guess maybe if I went there, but I have the sneaking suspicion that I wouldn't feel like that was home. So you are truly a Scotsman at heart, and also an average Australian, at least closer than Mick Dundee would be.
I have a weird mix there, but I think one of the things is, and Australia has this as well, is there's really not much, especially with Australia only being colonised in 17th century, 18th century. Late 1700s it was first explored and discovered and settled by all the convicts that came out of the UK. There's really no standing history that is much older than that. In Australia, there's no castles and old buildings from, the 11th century still standing, whereas they're dotted all over the UK. So I guess it's very, very different. And recently, especially, I've had my girlfriend's had this, she's been studying this at university. We've had a big, enthusiasm towards looking into Aboriginal history of Australia. The Aboriginal cultures of Australia were a nomadic people, and so they didn't really leave much behind, but some of the history that they did leave, cave paintings and such, is absolutely magical. And a lot of their history was told through stories told around a campfire rather than records in books in big buildings like a lot of European places have. No, this was all very, very human, I guess. It was always told down from mother to child, and that culture is so incredibly different to European culture of the same time period, back in the 11th century when, France was invading England about 6 times every 100 years. As soon as they had a new ruler in France, they would then hop over to England and insert that ruler in there and then lose control of France, and then someone else would do the exact same thing 100 years later. But at that same time frame, the Aboriginal people of Australia had remained practically unchanged for about 40,000 years. So the history is there. It's not as easy to see, and it's extremely interesting. It's something my girlfriend and I have had a big fascination with only quite recently. And then being somewhere like Scotland, I can remember going to Culzean Castle on the coast of Scotland. And that is one of the most beautiful places I know. Castle gardens out the front. There's reindeer running around in the yards. There's a brilliant view over the waterfront and over the Isle of Arran and places like that, and different islands dotted around off the coast. And it's very different going to something that's 1,000 years old, and then in Australia there's really nothing older than about 200 years old still standing at maximum. And it's I guess it's that contrast in history and historical background that's very interesting.
That is really interesting, and of course, one thing in Australia that's older than the castles is Aborigine culture itself, which, as you mentioned, remained virtually untouched untouched for thousands upon thousands of years. I've heard speculation that the Aborigine ethnicity is one of the oldest ethnicities on the planet, which I'm not entirely sure what that means, but they're surprisingly diverse, even though they were, a somewhat isolated group of people. Really fascinating stuff to get into, especially for somebody that myself, I have basically no ethnic history. I'm sort of a generic European transplanted into a continent that doesn't care about being European, and I think I'm pretty fine with that. So we've talked a little bit about your heart's nationalism. You're still connected to the home country, and that's just a cool place to have, some place that it's like a dream home. And speaking of which, I guess I could ask you if you could live anywhere and you didn't have to worry about any of the logistics of it, where would you live? What kind of house would you have?
Oh, I mean, this is a question I've been asking myself for about 20 years. Well, maybe not quite that long, but I don't think I've ever really stopped asking myself that. And I think I'm someone who flits around that idea very often, depending on, what time of day it is and whether the moon's blooming today. But it changes all the time. I mean, I'd love to spend some time in America, live in a big American city that's kind of, I guess the standard movie trope of someone having an apartment in New York or something, living in Queens or Brooklyn or something like that, just in a little apartment somewhere in America. That would be cool. At the same time, a little old cottage somewhere in the UK would be extremely nice, as long as it has good internet connection. The idea for me to settle down somewhere has always been, of course, forgetting the logistics of this, where I would pick, if I could pick anywhere, and what kind of house I would live in, is something I've never really stopped asking myself, and the answer has never really settled on anything. So I honestly can't say. I think I flit around to that, between those ideas all the time. I would love to live in a really old style, couple of 100-year-old English cottage somewhere. Somewhere my grandparents live is a tiny little village in the middle of nowhere in England. And, everyone sees the concrete jungle of England and then the out in the middle of nowhere cottage. Well, that's where my grandparents live, and that's where we've gone to stay when we've gone to the UK a couple of times. And it is a beautiful place. And if I could live there, I would. And maybe one day I will. And at the same time, if I could live in a big city in America, I would also think that would be one of the most amazing experiences as well. And of course, it's probably a little bit less glamorous when you actually go there, but that's kind of the idea I've built up in my head. And for one thing I can say, I could never decide. If I had the freedom to pick anywhere, I would never be able to decide. So I think having the limitations of, it's not always possible to just go somewhere else is actually kind of fortunate for me. Otherwise, I'd never be able to pick anywhere.
Sounds like your colonization instincts are still too strong.
I'll live everywhere.
Yes, that's a nice, quaint little country you have there. We'll take it. You have talked about your interest in the military from when you were a wee lad, and one of the things that in America comes along with military service is a lot of individual stories, things like Medal of Honor winners, is that the way to put it? Recipients, let's call it that way. There's always these personal stories that come in with the military services. Are there some personalities that stood out to you, some stories that inspired you, or just people that you looked up to as you dreamed about becoming a pilot one day?
Honestly, I don't really know if I had much of that. Really, my original thought of being a pilot was back when I was a child, and just being like, aircraft are cool. I'd love to fly one. That would be really cool. It's my kind of personal belief that everyone wishes they could fly, and as a pilot, you kind of you get pretty close. So I think that was my original wish to be a pilot, was just a case of it would be really cool. And of course, everyone has that, and it turns into a pipe dream or fantasy, and I stuck with it a little bit, and then it turned out that wouldn't be quite possible, and that was alright, because it was only really a wish of a potential, it would be a cool experience. So when that turned out to not be an option, it wasn't too much of a disappointment. I can honestly say I didn't really have a personal connection to it. I guess it was just something that I would have loved the experience of being able to do if it had been possible.
So I get the impression that you're something of a self-motivated man, and you're ready to roll with the punches, as it were. There was something I was going to ask you. Oh, right! I have to ask. Have you dreamed about flying, and what's that like for you? Because it seems like it's not always the same way when people dream about flying.
I have this thing where if I'm walking along the street and I might be, just enjoying my own company, probably with a pair of headphones in, listening to whatever, or just walking around, looking around, and look up, see the clouds, and think, you know what? I really wish I could just jump up and go fly throughout the clouds. And I have a massive fascination with space travel as well, which is not something I've ever really covered on my channel. I think I've only touched on a space game once, and that got very few views compared to everything else, so I kind of left it by the wayside. But one thing that's always fascinated me is space travel. I used to love the Halo games. I know everyone likes to poke fun at the Halo games, especially these days, but the old ones I adored, and every time I look up at the clouds, I'm thinking, you know what? 100 years' time, if I was still living on this planet, might be a case of there'd be a massive, spaceship descending from the clouds, the same way an airplane would come into an airport. Like, it would be so cool. And that's, every time I look up at the clouds, I'm thinking about that a little bit somewhere in my head. So I think part of being able to fly would be just going and exploring, I guess, the Earth from a different angle, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. I think you're right when you say that we all dream of flying. I think it's something that is built into our spirits, as it were. And with that, as a totally casual segue, we've talked about a lot of the aspects of your life, and I think I may have asked you this question before, just on a personal level, but is there a spiritual aspect to your life? And if so, would you mind sharing with us about that?
As far as spirituality and religion goes, I would call myself agnostic, where I have no idea what's out there or what's not. Different religious beliefs. I mean, there's part of every different religion that I think you kind of can appreciate as just being a really interesting way of looking at the world, and then there's some parts that, as someone who's also very interested in science, you go, I don't know about that. There's certain religions that go quite mythological, and well, I think all of them have that, but there's certain parts of religion that are just very interesting ways of looking at the world. And, for all I know, there may be a higher force out there, and there may not, and either way, I'm kind of content living my life as it has been set out, whether there's something out there watching over or not. So I think that's what I would say I believe to a spiritual level. It's just, whatever is or isn't out there, I am still me, and I still live my life. And one belief I've always had a strong connection to is the belief of Gaia, which is basically the Earth spirit, as in this belief basically says that the Earth, for all intents and purposes, is its own living organism. And we are all part of a network of very similar to neurons in your brain, and that is what we are to the planet. And we kind of live our lives as that role, I guess, for want of a better way of putting it. And that's a very interesting belief to me, and one I've always kind of connected with. Is the Earth is what gave birth to us, so we kind of got to look after her. And that's something that's always resonated quite strongly with me. But besides that, on a religious standpoint, I have no idea what I believe, and I don't think I ever will. And I'm perfectly fine with that. From a spiritual point of view, it's just a case of, we're all people. Every religious background, every ethnic background, we're all people. In the end, we're all born, we live, we die. We try and find our entertainment in the meantime, and I guess I like to think of everyone's stories, and everyone's differences and everyone's similarities are all there on the surface if you have the mindset to look for them. And I guess that's my spiritual standpoint.
All right, that's something I can definitely respect. You're very honest about the fact that you're not sure, you haven't been struck by lightning yet, or inspired in some other way, and you seem to have a real value for the experience of others, as I stumble over my words. And before you enter back into the live stream, maybe we could wrap this up with one more question. And now that I mention it, I've completely forgotten again what I was going to ask you. Oh, right, yes. So, in summary, what would you say, let's put it this way, what is best in life?
The one thing I value most in my life is having odd as it might sound for someone who chose to forego a strict 9-to-5 job and be a YouTuber instead, one of the things I value most is having a plan and having, okay, maybe a plan's the wrong way to put it, having something to work for, having a reason to motivate yourself, something that, as I said, whenever I hit that upload button on a YouTube video, it's a rush, it's a buzz, and I still get that even over a year in, trying to upload videos as regularly as I can, which I am terrible with. My upload schedule is whack. But every time I do get one out, it's a thrill, and that thrill renews my enthusiasm to do it again tomorrow even more. And I don't know if I'll ever get used to that, and certainly never get bored of that. And that's one of the things that I guess enjoy most right now, even when it doesn't go so well. I might branch out into a new type of content and it doesn't take. But I love it. I absolutely love it. And I think that's the most important thing to me right now in my life, is just exploring the possibility of this, because YouTube is always something I've wanted to do, especially, gaming on YouTube is something I viewed probably since about the late 2000s to maybe 2009, 2010. YouTube was something I saw as, wait, you can make money out of this? You can actually do this for a living? I thought it was just a hobby. And as soon as I found out that, I thought, you know what? I would love that. And now I'm finally doing it. And it is one of the most important things to me. And it is one of the things I love most about my life. And I guess if there's one thing I want to succeed in, it would be this, because I every single part of it I love. The creating the video, and then the editing of the video, and seeing people's reactions to it after it's finally up, and then thinking about what I'm going to do again next time it fills a lot of my time. And I kind of am extremely focused and I guess tunnel visioned on this, and that can play a part in my life in a negative way sometimes, and that I have a very tough time not being 100% focused on my YouTube, but sometimes you just got to take a break. But this is one of the most important things to me right now, and of course, besides that, my relationship with my girlfriend and my relationship with my family remains very important to me, and I guess it's a case of I'm going through life excited for the future, and whether I pass or fail. Every new day is exciting because I have something that never gets old, if that makes sense. So I will always have that enthusiasm to do this again tomorrow. I guess everything that I've experienced in life today, can't wait for next time. That's kind of the way I plug through my life, if that makes sense.
That's a great way to sum things up, and a great way to wrap up this interview. Let me know, was there anything anything that you missed out on saying that you were looking for a chance to say during the course of our conversation?
Oh, not really. I think we just about covered everything. I mean, as I said a little while ago, I didn't realize I had this much to say. You know, my YouTube channel has never really been so much about me personally. I've tried to keep things, at least to begin with. There's not much. You know, I've very rarely have I talked about my own life on my YouTube channel, and of course, everyone's personality comes through in their content. But besides that, my YouTube has been very impersonal, and it's been weird to kind of put myself out there on as far as content goes, and it's been a fun new experience, and yeah, I didn't realize I could fill an hour talking about my own life. I thought I was more boring than this, but as it turns out, I've had plenty of. You've asked me the right questions, and I've had a response to all of them, which I didn't realize I would be able to have. So that has been an amazing, I guess, way of putting myself out there in a way that I haven't done before, which is very interesting. And of course, you know, that's what I do with YouTube. Like I said, I'm always trying different things on YouTube. When I first started doing historical content, I made some hilarious errors with my historical content that people were very quick to point out how much of an idiot I sounded like talking about this information that I ended up being quite wrong. And, you know, it's just a case of try again next time, you know. But
yeah.
I've tried just about everything that I can, and I'm sure I'll come up with more different things to try in the future, and I'll give a go at everything.
That sounds exciting, and I'm looking forward to it. And as far as this conversation we had today, I really did enjoy it on a personal level, because I've been following your channel for a while and watching you grow and develop, and to have an open window into your personal life and your history, that's fascinating to me. Like I said, everybody has a story. Here we now have a piece of yours, and it's been a real pleasure. I think that people enjoy.
Oh, it's been very much a pleasure for me as well. Oh, sorry to interrupt you there. No, it's been real enjoyable for me as well, and I'm happy to have done it. Like I said, it's been different. It's been slightly weird sometimes, talking very, very personally. But I think that's great, and I've really enjoyed this as well, so thank you for having me around.
All right, it's been a real pleasure. I guess with that, I'll wrap this up for you guys who are watching. This has been the Scottish Koala. He is a YouTuber, self-started, and he's proof that you can make a living on YouTube if you play your cards right and have a bit of luck and a good amount of determination. He's shared with us about being the Scottish Koala, and well, this has been a rare look into his personal life. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.